If you dig this show, please consider rating it and reviewing it. And, if you really like it, become a Relax Your Grid superfan on Patreon. It's just $2 a month, and it means so much to me, and it really helps me put in the time and energy to produce each episode. Welcome to Relax Your Grid. I'm your host, Matt Brown. In this episode, I get to speak to Olov Johansson of the Swedish band Väsen. Many of you might know their music, and maybe you even play some of their tunes. It was a great honor to get to sit down and actually ask Olov about some of my favorite tunes that I've been playing of theirs for a long time, and to also hear about his brand new project under the name Vessen. The band is now a duo, and they have a new record out called Duo. Here's our conversation.
My name in Swedish pronunciation is Olov Johansson.
And your wonderful viola player, how do you pronounce his name?
Mikael Marin.
And the guitar player who spent decades with you, how do you pronounce his name?
Roger Tallroth.
Olov Johansson, welcome to Relax Your Grid.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here.
So, you live in Sweden, correct?
Yes.
In what part of the country do you live?
I live just outside U.S.A, and U.S.A is an old university town an hour's drive north of Stockholm, the capital.
The very first guest on this podcast is a friend of mine who's from Sweden, lives in Chicago, Patrick Ahlberg, and he put out a beautiful guitar album of Swedish music on the guitar. And from him and a few of my other Swedish friends, I've heard of U.S.A. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah.
Is that a place where traditional Swedish music has been particularly rich for a long time?
Yeah, in the province of Uppland, which is surrounding U.S.A, it's been a very rich tradition of music, especially connected to the Nyckelharpa, because that's where the instrument has been, where it's been developed and played for many hundreds of years.
To the best of your knowledge, when did the Nyckelharpa, when was it invented, or when do we have the earliest documentation of it existing as such?
The oldest picture is from 1350.
Oh my goodness.
And it's a stone carving on a church on the island of Gotland. And then there's quite a few church paintings as well and that's especially here in the area of Uppland, and they're from the 1400s and the 1500s, and it's angels playing the Nyckelharpa, and they are high up in the ceiling close to God. But then there's also a few other finds in other parts of the world. There's one church painting in Italy. There's a small statue on a house in Germany from medieval times. But it seems like it's been a very unusual instrument in medieval times. And it's not until maybe the early 1600s when the instrument picks up here in Uppland. And they create this model, the old style Swedish Nyckelharpa. So this is the only place in the world where we know it's actually been played, where there's music still left, where there's instruments still remaining, and so on. But and there's no one knows really, but there's many exciting theories.
What's your favorite of the exciting theories?
Well, the last one is it's a guy, and he's been looking in like every trace of a Nyckelharpa he has found. He follows it up, and he goes to see it, and he interviews people. And his thesis now is that when Swedish soldiers who were involved in the 30-year war, it was a big, complicated war in Europe in the 1600s, and when the soldiers from Uppland returned back home, they have seen the sorbischer Geige, for example, which is it's kind of a fiddle type instrument played by it's a Slavic minority living in Germany, the Sorbs. They're still there, and they have their own language, and they have a special kind of geige with the same kind of curved bent top. And there's also hurdy-gurdies around. So his idea, they've seen this sorbische geige and the hurdy-gurdies, and they mocked up the the first versions of the Swedish Nyckelharpa in the 1600s, and it got popular. And we don't know if that's true, but it's an interesting idea.
Indeed. How much has the Nyckelharpa changed then in these hundreds of years? Like I know you play Nyckelharpas of a couple different sizes, and it has this angelic at times sound, but sometimes it's kind of spooky. And I wonder, like structurally, can you say like, oh, the instrument I'm playing today is, similar in these ways, but it has changed in these other ways? Is it obvious how different or similar it is?
Well, to me it is. Each period have had its most popular instrument. Like the most modern one I'm playing right now, it's an octave Nyckelharpa tuned like a cello, basically. That was invented in the 1980s. By a friend of mine and his father. And the similar type to that one, but an octave higher, which is the standard one, that was invented in the 1930s by August Bolin. So we know who that was. And the model before that was the silverbass harpa, so from 1830 to 1930, basically. And that, I think that was inspired by the small button accordions where you got, it was easy to chord, to get chords to the music. And the type of music they played on that Nyckelharpa is really typical early 1800s major tunes. And while playing on the playing mechanism, you get the tonic and the dominant automatically while playing. So you only play in one key on that one. And the model before that was contrabass harpa, and that's more modal music. So you have melody and drone, but you can change the drone. And it's still chromatic. It's even quarter tones, special tangents for quarter tones on some of them. So you can play in many keys, but you always play music that fits with a drone on that one.
Wow. So that brings us very quickly to the underlying theme of this podcast. The show is called Relax Your Grid, and the reason for that is other names were already taken. And because I'm fascinated by how throughout traditional music around the world, but also popular music of the modern era and previous eras, different styles are more based on like grids. So whether the rhythm is very square so that every beat is the same length, or that we're dealing in equal temperament, or where there are quarter tones and microtones and all of that. And you play a kind of music where there's a lot more variety in the scale choices and the rhythm than the old time fiddle music that I grew up with, and certainly the way Western classical music is taught here in the States. Even though old time music has microtonality and rhythmic variation, but my impression of traditional Swedish music is that you have maybe a larger palette for notes to choose from, and even how you treat a 3-beat measure. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, as it is now, as a traditional as a traditional musician these days in Sweden, we kind of pick and choose from the different. We're not only playing music from a certain era, from a certain area, but if you think it's more fun to play more asymmetric polskas from the western part of Sweden, you play that music. Or if you're into music from old manuscripts from the 1700s, old Polonaise type of music, you can play all of that in the same concert or on the same jam session. While I was looking into the repertoire of a musician. He lived in the 1800s, and it was almost all major tunes. And he played the popular music of his time, the popular dance music of his time. And when he got old, he got a hearing problem, so he had difficulties in learning new music. And then he came out of fashion because the young people wanted to hear the new cool tunes. And he was he was getting old and playing quaint music, they thought. While we nowadays, we pick and choose from the whole history. So that's a privilege, I guess.
The latest album that I know of that you've made is this glorious duet album, Vessen album called Duo. And I had the privilege, so a couple episodes ago, I got to speak with Jake Sheps, who runs several camps, the Banjo Summit, the Modern Mandolin Workshop, and then he, in January, put on Hocktail Camp. And you were a special guest, and you gave a performance that I was able to watch, thanks to Jake, where you were playing some of the music off of the new album. So tell me a little bit, as a longtime fan of Vessen, which had been a trio for a while with guitar, how did the new duo album come about?
Yeah, we've been a trio for quite a long time, but as it can be sometimes, we kind of ran into an creative dead end or something, and Roger wanted to focus on other things, and the pandemic happened, and it was during that time. So Mikael and I, we wanted to continue. We still felt that we enjoy very much playing together and creating music. And for us, it was like a creative boom to sit down as a duo, because many ideas you had over the years that you felt that, no, this won't be fertile in the trio. But we tried many of those old ideas and came up with new ones, and it was just joyous. And we used instruments that's also been hard to use in the trio. So Mikael came up with this bass. I guess it's a bass fiddle. It's really a viola, an electric viola that he put octave strings on. And he's mostly picking and also playing bow on it. And then he has a violoncello da spalla also, which is a small cello plate up here. And that's an instrument that has existed before. There's a small community in the Baroque world who is into that. And I started to use other kinds of Nyckelharpas more. And we had just fun exploring these new ideas and these new sounds.
Well, it's a gorgeous record, and what I liked about seeing the concert you gave for Hawktail Camp, so seeing you perform the material live and then enjoying the album since then, is that I hear some of the elements that I've always loved about Vessen's music, these incredible melodies, and I'm not always sure. One of the things I want to ask you about, I'm not always sure what's a traditional piece versus a composed piece, which as a traditional musician, if someone's not sure that you've written a tune or it's an old tune, I feel like that's an accomplishment that you're adding to the mix and to the repertoire without standing out like a sore thumb, as we might say. So they're gorgeous tunes as always, but I was really struck by the two things you just mentioned, which is Mikael playing these bass notes that are so rich and they have this pop to them because it's pizzicato, it's an electric version of the instrument, and the offset between those pieces where your angelic sound is on top with the melody, and then he's got these beautiful, precise moments of the low, rich sounds that he's plucked. Like that's all you need is the counterpoint between these bass lines, because he's always, even with the bow, of course, always had these beautiful counterpoint lines that he's played in the band. But then, like you said, with the small cello that goes on the shoulder under the chin, maybe this album, more than any other Vessen album, to me, I hear Baroque elements. There's some tracks where I'm like, wait, could that be a Baroque piece, like that they learned off of a manuscript? Are any of those latter group, are any of them classical works, or are you just conjuring up those sounds?
I wouldn't say anything of it is classical work, but if I'm not sure now. I don't remember all the pieces on the on the recording, but
let me actually give you an example, because I have, for example, this track.
that is probably composed in maybe the 1950s or something. Yeah, and it's a tune I've played since I started to play the Nyckelharpa. It's composed by the famous Nyckelharpa hero we had, Eric Sahlström. And he composed this tune for an open air mass that he was asked to play on. So he told this story to this tune. He composed this tune to have something special to play on this open air mass down by the lake. And he got into his car. He had an old Volvo PV, and it was a winding dirt road down to the lake, and it was so winding, so he forgot the tune. So he played a traditional march, a bit slow, that is called Brännvinslåten. Basically moonshine march, kind of for spirits, but he played it a bit slowly and ceremonial, and people liked it very much. But then on the way back, along the winding road, he remembered the tune, and he practiced it a lot when he got home, so he would remember it. And then it's been a real hit. It's played by most Nyckelharpa players in Sweden, and it's been set for choir and classical orchestra, and it's a very popular tune.
How does one pronounce the name of the title?
Andakten.
Let's give it a listen. I've heard stories of traditional Swedish musicians playing in the church versus playing, for dancing or, for enjoyment at home. How much did playing in church influence those traditional players? Because one story I've heard is that there was a generation of musicians who had basically two versions of their repertoire, the version that had all the quarter tones and the microtones, and then those same pieces they might play, like they'd call that playing it the old way, and those same places they'd play in a newer way that matched the temperament of a keyboard, like an organ in the church.
I think that was happening for some fiddlers, and that we do the same still. If you're playing a tune together with a piano player or an accordion player, you have to choose. And if you're playing it only on fiddles, for example, you're using a different intonation.
As a Nyckelharpa player, does that mean you choose a different Nyckelharpa that has, or do you just, does your standard instrument that you take to a jam, do you have the option of having the different tonalities built like on the same instrument?
The standard I would bring to a jam is that's a chromatic instrument. So I can bend the tones somewhat. I can bend the string like on a guitar up, and you can make it go down with the bow.
Just with extra bow pressure?
Yeah, and as you go down in speed, and so that's how you intonate on your Nyckelharpa. With left hand pressure, you can raise the tones and adjusting with the bow to lower the pitch.
When did you begin playing traditional music? When did you come to the Nyckelharpa? Were you a young child?
I was 14 when I started, and my mother and all her siblings played music just for fun. And there was all kinds of instruments. It was fiddle, Nyckelharpa, double bass, piano, guitar, accordion, mandolin. And it was always a jam session on the family parties on my mother's side. And that's, I thought that was amazing. People sitting down, just playing tunes from their head, and having fun, enjoying. I really liked it. So we borrowed the Nyckelharpa from my uncle. He was the Nyckelharpa player, and my mother enjoyed it, so she bought an instrument from a friend of the family who had built a few. So I started to play on that instrument, and it turned out to be my path of life.
I'd say it's working.
Yeah.
Did you have formal instruction from older members of your family or older musicians, or were you just ingesting this in those jam sessions around home or at family gatherings?
First, I went to see my uncle and I recorded. I remember I had the first recorder I had to use. It was not even a cassette. It was open reel. About this big, and I recorded some tunes that he played and started to learn. But then soon I met a really skilled traditional musician from the next small town, and his name was Curt Tallroth, distant relative to our guitar player, and he invited me to come to see him, and we can play tunes together, he said. It's good fun. And so I did. And through him, I was kind of in the system of traditional musicians in the province. So I met many of them through him.
At what point did you decide that you wanted music making to be your career?
Not until it kind of was. It was mostly for fun. I was starting to do some gigs together with Curt, where he brought me along. And then I started to teach some, and then I met Mikael. We met when we were maybe 18 years old. I started to play together, and we got some gigs, and then I found myself playing quite a bit, and actually I could see it might be possible to make a living from this. But I was trained as an electronics engineer. So when I was 25, I had been working as an engineer for a few years, but music picked up more and more, and I felt that now is the time to give it a try. So it was a mix. I got a gig on a theater, playing music for a theater, playing with Mikael, and then Väsen started, and teaching some workshops, and one thing leads to another. And
that's so cool. I love hearing about how music was a part of your family life as you were growing up. I can really relate with that. It's not a family tradition, but my father loves traditional music of all kinds, and particularly American old-time music. And so I grew up with old-time music jam sessions in our living room and other people's living rooms and backyards, and going to festivals and conventions for it. And that was the main thing we did as a family. But it took seeing some professional old-time musicians. Bruce Molsky was the one in particular who I realized, like, wait, and I was getting to know Bruce as he was transitioning from a career as an engineer into a career as a full-blown touring musician. Watching him perform and play these old songs and instrumentals, and telling the stories of them, and playing to sold out house concerts and various size venues, the light bulb went out. I was like, well, oh, like a person could do this. And I heard stories about how hard it is to be on the road and from various people, but
yeah,
I think it helps to develop the love for the music first, and just realize this is so fun. Like, I get to make music with other people. That's fun. But then it also helps to get to test the waters a little bit, and either try it yourself, play for dances, or see people who are, wonderful established musicians do what they do. I'd love to ask you about a couple of Vessen tunes over the years, and just get your sense about how they came about, because my first encounter with your music was through another student of Bruce's, Brittany Haas, who's been a friend of mine for quite a while now. We met as she was getting ready to go to college, and I lived in Pennsylvania and she was in college in New Jersey, and I would sometimes go visit her at Princeton, and we would just go to a practice room in the music school, and we would sit there and we'd play, well, of course, Josephine's Waltz and The Dragon Ship. And she introduced me to your music, and maybe she learned about it through Daryl Anger, who I know you've collaborated with, who was her other main teacher. But anyway, so I've had this relationship with some of your material for 20 years now, or close to 20 years now. And so I would just love to get your sense, kind of whether it's a tune you wrote or one of the other band members or traditional, just to throw some names of tunes at you and learn a little bit about where they come from. Would that be okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so let's start with the one I think I mentioned first, which is the Dragon Ship. Is that a composed tune from one of the three of you?
That's one of Mikael's tunes. And the name, the Dragon Ship, is actually where he lived at that time, in a house in a suburb of Stockholm. The actual the blocks have names. It's nothing you say. You don't speak about those names. It's more like the name of the property, kind of. But the name of that block is Drakskeppet, which means the dragon ship. And I'm not sure about. It's probably just a fun little tune he came up with. Mikael composed a lot of music, all the time.
And you're quite prolific as well. Have you been writing tunes from those early days of learning the Nyckelharpa?
No, I started quite early to compose tunes as well, because that was a natural. The majority of the old fiddlers I met and played together with and learned from, they composed too. Curt, for example, my first and main mentor and teacher, for him it was a way of, he picked up an instrument every day early in the morning, and if he didn't feel like it, kind of, if it was, this is not the most fun I can think of right now, but then he composed something, and then it immediately was fun to him. It was fun to play music, to play this new piece of music. And I can relate to that. It's sometimes you need to come up with something fun to play.
I am so inspired by that, and by this is a feature of Swedish music that I've admired since I first learned of it. I got the impression, and you've confirmed it now, that there is a much more active engagement with the material in terms of people who play the traditional music also are writing tunes. And that's, like you're saying, it's not one or the other. But you might wake up one morning and say, I kind of, I'm in the mood to, or this tune kind of creeps out. Or one thing I worry about the old time music community, and I worry about it because I love the music and it's my home musically, is that I feel like there's a dangerous reverence for the oldest tunes and the most archaic, rarest tunes, and not quite enough of a permission structure of like, and you can also write a tune. And like, maybe there's a little, I don't know, that a new tune is a second class tune unless it really just takes off and is appearing at all the festivals. And then it's okay for it to be a new tune. I don't like that. I like what you're describing, where writing a tune and playing an old tune sound like they're on the same footing.
Yeah, and I would also say that lots of the tune making, if you're playing in an ensemble, is also kind of customized for that ensemble. You're composing something that you strongly suspect that the others will get ideas from and enjoy playing. It's a lot of that as well when you're creating a new repertoire.
So that makes me wonder then, these first couple tunes that I'm wondering about from the Vessen catalog, like the Dragon Ship, did Mikael write that knowing, did he write it for the band? Did he know that the three of you were going to arrange this? Do you remember?
I don't think so. I think that was just something he came up with for the fun.
How about, this is actually, I think, my favorite to play myself. The tuning tune, is it Stamlåten, or how do you, I don't speak Swedish. How does one pronounce that tune?
Yeah, Stämlåten.
Stämlåten.
That means, yeah, and that was, that's one of Roger's tunes, and he had this kind of little phrase he always played to check that the tuning was accurate. When he tuned his guitar, he always, the same little phrase came out to check some different intervals, and then one day he decided to make a piece of music out of this little phrase.
I find that melody to just be so like soothing and satisfying. I've played it on guitar, just in standard tuning, and then on my violin as well. Your band has, over the years, has produced more original tunes that I love than any other band in the world that I can name. I just really like, in terms of music you've contributed, the three of you, to all of us to play. It's just extraordinary to me. I love it. And Josephine's Waltz, is that also one of Roger's compositions? Do I remember that?
Yes, and I remember when we learned that and played it the first time, because that was for his niece, the baptism of his niece, and we learned it just before the kind of ceremony in church.
And so the band played it for the baptism itself?
We did, yes. I think there's even a recording of it from that from that time. Old shaky video somewhere.
What's it like to hear one of the original Vessen tunes come up in a jam, or to know that folks around the world are taking these pieces and keeping them going in their own way?
It's just fun. It's amazing. That tune has spread enormously. I think there's people recording it every year. And there's so many stories of this. And it was really thanks to Dervish, I would say, the Irish band. We played it on a festival in Copenhagen. We were hanging in the hotel lobby. It was a festival, and we played this tune, and they really liked it, and they wanted to learn it. So they learned it, and then they asked us to come to Dublin and record it together with them. So it was put in together with a song on one of their. The album is called At the End of the Day. So it's spread out from Dervish in the Irish music community. And that's a big network. I think that was how it happened.
And then it came to America one way or another. I don't know. I learned it from Brittany, and now I know a lot of people know it here in not as much the old time world, but like the younger bluegrass musicians, the kind who might have gone to Berkeley or gone to Alistair Fraser's fiddle camp.
Yeah.
Somehow the tune got to the States and spread among the younger folks my age, and in their 30s and younger, who go to fiddle camps and go to music school as folk musicians. It's not as common as Soldier's Joy or some of our most common pieces, but it is one of those tunes I find that if I meet another musician of my generation or the next younger, it's one of those that we'll have in common. They might not know a lot of old time tunes, and I might not know a lot of whatever tradition they're coming from, but maybe they know Josephine's, which is an amazing thing about a tune. There's an American composed piece called Red Prairie Dawn that was written by Gary Harrison, remarkable multi-talented musician, and he built zithers and he collected a lot of traditional music in Illinois, downstate Illinois, so south of Chicago. But he wrote this tune called Red Prairie Dawn, and I've heard very accomplished musicians who aren't old-time musicians. I think it was Julian Lage, the jazz guitar player. The first two tunes he learned, old-time tunes, first one was Angeline the Baker or something classic American tune, and the second one was Red Prairie Dawn. So I feel like Josephine's Waltz has a similar just spreading power. How about on the record Keyed Up? How about Flippin'? Where does that come from?
Flippin', that's one of Mikael's tunes as well. I don't know exactly if he composed it for this record, but he had a lot of tunes. He was in a flow there. And Flippin' is, I think he composed it on the fiddle, the normal fiddle. It's a fun fiddle tune, and it's kind of a challenge actually to play it on the Nyckelharpa, but it's still fun. But it's not one of the easiest tunes on the Nyckelharpa, but it's a fun, high energy tune, and that's also spread out in the world through Punch Brothers.
Yes, I was just about to mention, I was so, when that album of theirs came out with Flippin' on it, I was so excited to hear their treatment, and they definitely dialed in the high energy that you're talking about, and that was a really fun to hear it through their lens.
Yeah, and on that album as well, that's like one of the most traditional sounding tunes.
Exactly.
on the record. So a friend of mine was on tour in Australia, and there on the festival someone played it as a traditional American bluegrass piece.
I've had this conversation with some friends of mine. Sometimes where you hear a tune first just like so imprints, like, oh, that must be a bluegrass tune because this band that I think of as a bluegrass band, they played it well. Turns out it was composed by a Swedish musician. Yeah, you're totally right. So that, for Punch Brothers fans or people curious about Punch Brothers, that's from their album Who's Feeling Young Now, from 10 years ago now, 2012. And as I look at the track list, yeah, they cover Kid A, the Radiohead tune, and then they have a bunch of their own originals. I would say by far, Flippin', which they parenthetically call the Flip, is much more traditional. It sounds much more like a traditional fiddle tune than anything else on that record. So yeah, It's funny that that's the piece that makes them sound like the most like rootsy and rooted and folky, and it works. It's a great addition to that album. There's one more I want to ask about from your deep catalog before we finish up with some of my favorites from your new record. So tell me, this tune Hasa A's, also from Keyed Up?
That was composed in the same period by Mikael. And Hasse A, that's a neighbor of his who lived in the next house. I think he played electric guitar or something, and Mikael was jamming with Hasse and his band, just for the fun, I remember. And for his birthday, he composed this tune.
I love music as a present. That's a beautiful thing. To culminate this conversation, it's such an honor to speak with you. I've been such a fan of yours in particular, and the band as a whole, for so long. I really love the new record. It's gorgeous, and it keeps the Vessen energy alive and moving forward. But like we were saying earlier on, with these new elements, now that it's two of you and trying different instruments added into the mix. So there are three pieces I want to ask you about. And the third one I would love to feature as the full-length track. So I would love to hear the Swedish pronunciation of this. But the first one I'm curious about is the Silvers Schottish. How do you say that?
Silverschottis.
Oh, wow. Okay. Is this one of your own?
Yes. And this one, I took apart my silverbass harpa. It's an old instrument. It's about 100 years old. And when I haven't really restored it. I've just set it in shape to make it possible to play. But then when we were going touring with that instrument last summer, last summer, I had to do some more serious restoring. I had to change the tangents, the little pegs stopping the string, because some of those were falling out. And some tuning pegs also were just wiggling around in those 100-year-old holes. So I took it apart, fixed everything, and the first thing when I got it in tune, it was this tune. It kind of cooked together in my head while working on this instrument, and when I got it together, it was just waiting, sitting there waiting to be played.
This tune has such a groove to it. Like, that melody is so hummable. I can imagine just like walking down the street. Dum, ba-dum, ba-da-ba-dum. Like it churns along in this joyful kind of bounce.
There's no dark clouds in that one.
It's all blue skies.
Yes.
Olov, what a piece of music. All right. Second one off of the newest album, Duo, is this is the one that like makes my old time music brain kind of explode. Svedmark? How does one say that?
Svedmark.
Svedmark.
Yeah.
What's going on here rhythmically? Because I imagine that the measures are full of 3 beats, but it seems like beats 2 and 3 are stretched out farther than beat 1. Is that true?
Well, kind of. This is the most common type of polska that was played on this silver bass harpa from the 1800s. It was the dance of the period. It's called bun polska, and it's the style of polska. And the way you play it's very bouncy. So you kind of accentuate all the beats in the measure. You play do 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 de de do do de de do do de de do do. So it's very woo 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 woo. And in this type of music, its typical features are that if you play a phrase that's repeated, like the 2 first measures, ra di dum be do di di da da, it's rhythmically similar, but slightly different notes. And then you always do something rhythmically with the second one. And a common thing to do is to play the second beat a bit earlier. So you make a rhythmical variation if you have a similar repeated phrase like that.
It's astounding to me. I love everything about it, and it's like both unsettling and incredibly exciting to my brain. And I just there's a part of me that's like, it's like watching an action movie coming from the music that I've grown up with. Like, what's gonna happen next? I'm on the edge of my seat. That second beat coming just like a tad bit earlier than I expect is it's so fun. It's so fun.
And harmonically, you are not on the edge of your seat. It's totally predictable, the chord structure of that tune. While rhythmically, they managed to make that music very interesting.
I think it's maybe kind to the listener that you make one of the features like very exciting and the other is a little bit more familiar. Because if it's all exciting, it's like, is it too much?
Maybe.
Is that one an older tune then? Is that a traditional tune or composed in that style?
No, that's an old one. And Svedmark, he was he lived in the 1800s, and according to the legend, he had the best dance beat in the area where he played. So he was kind of well known in his area there.
So the last one I want to ask you about is my favorite off of Duo, and I'd like to end the public episode, by playing it. Patreon supporters, you'll get to learn a tune off of Olov briefly. We'll do just a very, very express lesson. But to end the episode here, I'd love to hear about Advents Polska, and then we'll listen to it as we go out. Can you tell me how to actually say it in Swedish and where this one comes from?
Yeah, Advents Polska. And we just... it was when we started to work on this record, it was during the pandemic. I guess it's about a little bit more... It's 1.5 years ago, because it was in the time of Advent, before Christmas, and I knew Mikael was coming here. We recorded the album in this room and rehearsed here, and having that in mind, I was kind of excited about. So this tune came to me on my silver bass harpa, and I taught it to him, and we started to arrange it and played it, and we had lots of fun with it. And I gave it the name Advents Polska because I think it was about the first Advent when he came.
Makes a lot of sense to me. Well, if I had to pick one track just to tell a friend, oh, Vessen is a duo right now. They have a new record called Duo. Here's what they sound like. This would be the one. I think the whole record is gorgeous, and congratulations on it, and on such an amazing trajectory of the band over the decades. But I love the new sound, the two of you, and this one tune, this one track is just a great expression of all the advantages of two strong musical voices working together. The beautiful Nyckelharpa, the gorgeous, rich bass electric viola sound. So we'll listen to it as we go out. But thank you so much for taking the time. And from you're my guest who's piping in from the farthest away. So thanks for zooming in from Sweden for this.
Thank you for asking. It's been a pleasure.
Relax Your Grid is produced, edited, and mixed by me, Matt Brown. Tim Brown provides post-production assistance, Otto Allard is the designer, Max Allard created and played the transition music. Tune in next time for another episode, and until then, relax your grid.